Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace and mercy and blessings be upon all of you. Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a wonderful and blessed Ramadan. Welcome to another installment of the Pre-Iftar Quran discussion. We are continuing our discussion today with the 14th juz of the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واجعلنا من عبادك الصالحين. We seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan, and we begin in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and by sending our prayers for blessings and peace upon the most noble of prophets and messengers, and upon his family and companions. And we ask Allah to give us a sound understanding of the religion, to teach us the proper interpretation of things, and to make us among his pious servants. Ameen. So whereas yesterday we covered about 2.5 chapters of the Quran, today we are in the 14th juz, which covers only 2 surahs, namely al-Hijr and al-Naml. The first chapter we'll discuss is entitled al-Hijr, or the Rock. It begins by first addressing the disbelievers, criticizing them for their insults and stubbornness, such that even if the sky opened up and they were raised in it, they will reject it and call it magic. Then Allah reminds us of his favors, speaking about his creation, the heavens, the earth, the winds and water, and even humanity and jinn. And upon mentioning the story of the creation of Adam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about Iblis, Satan, who refused to bow before Adam even though Allah commanded it. Allah kicks Iblis out, but grants him one request, which is to delay his punishment until the day of resurrection, so that Shaitan can spend all his time trying to draw people astray. But Allah assures us that the believers, that Shaitan will not have any power over them, so long as we remain righteous. And at this point, Allah reminds us of the many delights of heaven. And then we hear of the story of the angels, who first stopped off to tell Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was very old at this time, of the good news that he would have a son. Then they went to warn Lut alayhi salam and his family to leave his village and not look back. And there's a lot that can be learned from the juxtaposition of these two encounters. But for now we can mark the contrast between the good news given to Ibrahim, who was pious and patient and prayed for a pious family, and the calamity sent to the people of Lut alayhi salam, who were lustful and perverse and refused the opportunity to have families. So it echoes what was said before: the path of the pious leads to felicity, and the path of the astray leads to ruin. And then the chapter continues with stories of how other nations were punished as well, and finally ends with a reminder of our own judgment, which is coming. So we should make the time to praise Allah until we reach our deaths. Perhaps the dominant theme in this chapter of the Quran is that of disbelief, in that throughout this chapter we are given descriptions of disbelievers, as well as reminders about how they were and how they will be punished. And it's important to notice that for these disbelievers, whether they are the pagans in Arabia during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Iblis and his refusal at the creation of Adam, or the people of Lut ﷺ and other nations who rejected their prophets, the key element in common is their stubbornness and refusal to accept the truth, because they think they know better. In other words, while they all might hide behind intellectual arguments, the real source of their disbelief is selfishness and their unwillingness to follow the commands of God. Those disbelievers who refuse their prophets might know deep down inside that these prophets are from God, but they ignore this and instead challenge the authority of prophets, trying to drive them out and even kill them. Similarly, Iblis or Shaitan refused to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam, even though he was given this command by Allah directly. There is no question that Iblis knew and believed in Allah, but his overwhelming stubbornness and arrogance prevented him from following God's command, even when he was giving it directly. And in both cases of Iblis and the disbelievers, they hide their arrogance behind the language of reason, even though their arguments are quite weak. The disbelievers ask how God can revive the dead, even though God created everything. and Iblis argued that he was better than Adam, even though God created them both, and obviously knows who should be prostrating to whom. But in both cases, while the disbelievers and Iblis might think that they are defeating the calls to good through their rebellion, they are in fact defeating their own selves and leading themselves to destruction. Finally, before moving on to the next chapter, I'd like to highlight a couple verses from this one. First is Allah telling the Prophet ﷺ, "Nabbi ibadi anni ana al-Ghafurur Rahim." Inform my servants that I am the forgiving, the merciful. Wa anna adabi huwa adabun alim, and that my punishment is a painful punishment. These verses come halfway through the surah and neatly summarize the main point for us as believers to take away. Because throughout the surah, it might seem like Allah is only talking to the disbelievers, but in reality, He is addressing all of us, because even we as believers have a lot to learn from the stories of previous nations. After all, we can oftentimes exhibit the same stubbornness and arrogance and rebellion, perhaps not about the religion as a whole, but perhaps maybe about some particular beliefs or obligations. So even for us, the reminder is still there that God's punishment is painful. Yet if we take these messages to heart and seek God's forgiveness, then we should know that God is forgiving and merciful. Another powerful verse in this surah is, "Inna sa'ata la'atiyah, fasfah is-safha al-jamil." Verily the hour is coming, so forgive in a beautiful way. So Allah, while specifically addressing the Prophet ﷺ to be patient and forgiving with those who were insulting him in Mecca, He is also talking to us in a general way, and telling us not to get so obsessed with our disputes in this world that we forget that the hour is coming soon. It is not worth our time or mental or spiritual health to be caught up in bitter disputes. Rather, it's better to forgive and move on to more important matters. And the last 3 verses of this surah continue with this idea, acknowledging that the Prophet ﷺ, and again us by extension, are distressed and sorrowed by the nasty things that those opposed to Islam say. But Allah's advice is to be with those who pray, and to praise Allah, and as the last verse says, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. Worship your Lord until certainty comes to you. And here the scholars say that certainty means death. In other words, don't stress out about what the enemies of Islam are doing, but instead focus on your worship until your end. The other chapter in this section of the Quran is entitled al-Nahl, the bee. This chapter begins where the previous chapter left off, promising us, the Prophet ﷺ, and especially the disbelievers who were criticizing him, that Allah's command, which some scholars say is the Day of Judgment, is coming, so don't be impatient for it. And as elsewhere, Allah reminds us of His power and all He has created for us, drawing our attention to our crops and vegetation, our riding animals, all the fruits we eat, the night, the day, the sea, all لِتَبْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that we can seek of His bounty, so that we might be grateful. So this theme of shukr, which we saw yesterday in Surah Ibrahim, is very much present in this surah as well. Allah then transitions into a criticism of those who disbelieve, who are arrogant, who ignore God's signs, and dismiss revelation as mere tales. He warns them of the coming judgment, and as we see consistently throughout the Quran, He follows that up with glad tidings for the righteous, those who do good in this world. Still, Allah continues with His responses to critiques of the disbelievers, asking them whether they are so sure that Allah will not destroy him, if not for His mercy, and whether they have reflected upon all that Allah has created, and how it prostrates to Him. Allah then describes their hypocrisy, how they ask Allah for help in times of need, but then commit idolatry as soon as those calamities are lifted, how they attribute daughters to Allah, yet how they become depressed when they have daughters, even to the point of burying them, and how they attribute to Allah whatever they dislike. Despite all these problems, Allah tells us He will defer their punishment, and furthermore reminds them and all of us of His vast mercies. He sends rain, provides us with milk, and even gives us benefit in the bellies of bees. Moreover, He has gifted humanity with a variety of provisions, yet still some of us associate partners with Him. So the problem with the disbelievers is that they ignore these blessings. And Allah assures the Prophet that if they turn away, remember that the only obligation on you is to convey the message clearly. They know that Allah has given them everything, but they deny it. So Allah reminds them and us again of their coming punishment. And for the believers, Allah reminds us of our responsibilities, telling us a verse that we might hear often in Jummah khutbahs. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. Allah orders justice, good conduct, and giving to one's close relations, and He forbids immorality, bad conduct, and oppression. He admonishes you so that perhaps you will be reminded. So Allah calls on us to keep our covenant with Him and to stand by our word, reminding us that we will be asked about what we used to do. Allah encourages us to do good by promising us rewards, and He reminds us that Shaitan only has power over those who take him as an ally. Then Allah returns to rebuking those who mock the Prophet and the Quran, affirming that they are the true liars and fabricators, whose hearts have been sealed, who prefer this world to the next, and who are heedless. And finally, Allah has some uplifting words for the believers, encouraging us to eat the lawful and good, while staying away from a few impure things, to turn to Allah in repentance, to follow the path of Ibrahim a.s. in worshipping God and standing for the truth, to call to Allah's path of wisdom, and if it involves debates, to do so with ihsan, with excellence, and to be patient, and remember that Allah is with those who are pious and do good. So a lot of the themes that come up in this chapter are echoes of what we saw in previous chapters. So we discussed the theme of shukr yesterday, and we even see the same phrase in the surah as we saw in Surah Al-Ra'd, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you were to count the blessings of Allah, you would not be able to. Another important theme that we saw previously, but is argued quite forcefully in this surah, is the hypocrisy and irrationality found in disbelief. So while the previous chapter highlighted that disbelievers were stubborn and arrogant, this chapter highlights these traits to demonstrate how disingenuous their beliefs and ways are. So while we already mentioned their hypocrisy, how they call on Allah in times of dire need but forget Him in times of ease, and how they used to attribute daughters to Allah but then hated to have daughters themselves, Allah also argues with them by reminding them that He is the creator of all. He says, أَفَمَا يَخْلُقُ كَمَنْ يَخْلُقُ أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Is the one who creates like the one who does not create? Will you not then be reminded? He further reminds the disbelievers, وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ لَا يَخْلُقُونَ شَيْئًا وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ. Those who call on other than Allah do not create anything, but they themselves are created. So we see throughout this chapter and throughout the whole Quran that Allah is showing the weaknesses of the intellectual arguments of the disbelievers while also highlighting their flaws in character and judgment. But again, it will be wrong for us to believe, for us who believe, to not also think about how this might apply in our lives, especially because we affirm that God is the creator and sustainer of the universe. And while there are a lot of verses we can highlight in this surah, some of which we already brought up, I'd like to add one or two more. First, Allah reminds us, مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدْ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. What is with us will vanish, but what is with Allah remains. And what will stay with Allah? He tells us in the next verse, whoever does good, whether male or female, and is a believer, we shall indeed give them a good life and a great reward for what they have done. In other words, material wealth vanishes, but good actions, when done for the right intention, are everlasting. And Allah also tells us, and we'll end on this note, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا وَاشْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ إِيَّاهُ تَعْبُدُونَ. So when it comes to material things, Allah tells us, eat from that which Allah has provided for you, that is lawful and good, halal and tayyib, and be grateful for the blessings of Allah, if it is to Him that you worship. And while this verse refers specifically to food, it really can refer to all of the blessings in our lives. If we truly believe in Allah, we should strive to make sure that whatever we enjoy in this world is lawful and good for us, and that we thank Him for it. So we end by thanking Allah for everything He has given us and asking Him for forgiveness if we have said anything wrong or made any mistakes. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'una bima 'allamtana wa zidna min fadlika ikhlasan wa ilma. O Allah, we ask you to teach us that which benefits us and to benefit us from that which you have taught us and to increase us in knowledge and sincerity. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. And we ask Allah to send His blessings and peace on the Prophet Muhammad, his family, and his companions. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.